Alright, gamers. It's time. It finally happened. The ultimate balance apocalypse. One of the biggest balance patches of all time is hitting the game. We've got a lot of stuff going on here. Every build that's good. So we've got Quickness Berserker. We've got Alacrity Blade Sword. We've got Quickness Untamed, Alacrity Druid. We've got DPS. We've got DPS Tempest. We've got Alacrity Scourge. Be careful what you wish for there, by the way. Okay, we've got a lot of stuff. We got things happening. 1 million cooldowns have been reduced. We got stuff for World vs. World. Not that much for PvP, I think. A few things here, but not that much. Confusion's getting changed. We've got Scrapper is now combo-oriented again. I hope you like combo fields. We got a lot of stuff. In fact, there's too much stuff. There's actually so much stuff that not all of it is even here in the notes. We're going to have to remember some of it. That's how much stuff there really is. But what is our goal here? Our goal from ArenaNet, improving the feeling of moment-to-moment gameplay from many boon support builds. We want these builds to have more flexibility in utility skill choice and not be required to activate a particular utility type on cooldown to provide quickness or alacrity. Alternate playstyles for specializations, tuning up underutilized weapons and solidifying their roles, and removing skill-specific recharge reduction traits and rolling the reduction into baseline skills where it makes sense to do so. So there it is. That is what's about to be happening. That's what's supposed to be happening. Let's see if we think that that is actually what's going to happen. So first up, we actually have a general change here. And this is, I think, very specifically targeted at Mesmer, specifically Mirage. Confusion is getting normalized even more. This actually happened a while back, but now they're going even further with it, in fact. Specifically, Confusion damage has been adjusted as follows in PvE. Damage over time is going up significantly, baseline of 18 and a scaling of 0.05. And the skill activation damage, the baseline is going down by 1/3, and the scaling is also going down by 1/3. So you might be thinking, oh no, this is just going to, you know, Confusion is now basically pink burning. And kind of, yeah, it is a little bit like pink burning at this point, but the alternative here is it's completely broken, and it underperforms elsewhere. So their goal here is to make it into like a nice to have. So instead of being like, your build either dominates or it's pretty mediocre, it's like, ooh, if you have Confusion, that's a really nice to have thing on bosses that attack faster. Which, in my mind, okay, in my mind, that kind of makes a little bit of sense. Right? Okay, it makes some sense. Oh, yeah. Down to 1/3. Down by 2/3. Right? Down by 1. Yeah, not down by 1/3. Down to 1/3. So, big changes there. I think they actually have kind of computed this out that it will probably work out about the same. It will come down in some areas, go up in a lot of other areas, and that's very much the goal. And I will, before we get into these, by the way, all these changes, I think it's worth noting, by the way, all of these are subject to change, guys. Give your feedback. Share your feedback on these changes. As, of course, ArenaNet will iterate, and ultimately they will fix any issues that do come up as a result of this. And I really think that one thing that is important to note about this stuff, listen up, everyone. We are in the universe right now where ArenaNet is doing balance patches every 3 months, okay? And what does this mean? Well, I'll tell you what it means. It means that now when there's a balance patch, you don't have to wait an entire year to get it fixed, okay? Now, it will actually get fixed relatively quickly, hopefully, right? In theory, at least. So just keep that in mind whenever you're evaluating balance patch changes, because, you know, they might be a little bit rocky in some places, might be a little intense, but don't worry, plenty of room to iterate. And of course, ArenaNet now even have a dedicated team towards skill balancing. So look, okay? You've got to get out of the past. In the past, you know, your build gets nerfed. It stays, you know, in the dumpster for 2 years. Not anymore. But yeah, there you go. And actually, I think what makes sense to do is I think we'll let you go and talk about Mesmer right now. Let's go do Mesmer. We could do all of the light armor classes first, guys. Let's get in there. Let's do Elementalist, Necromancer, and Mesmer. Let's get some of the juice, you know, out of the way immediately, right? Let's have some fun here. So I'll scroll down to Mesmer, and we'll go ahead and get directly into that. And then I'm also going to reduce the music volume, because even though I do actually really enjoy the ore music, it's actually a little bit too much. You know, it's out of hand right now. But anyway, in the same way that I just turned down the music, Signet of Humility cooldown halved in PvE. Actually, really nice. I mean, I'm honestly a little bit surprised they did this. This skill is already really good. Now they're making it even better. I suspect it's kind of to maybe differentiate it from Gravity Well, potentially on Chronomancer, so you have this big single target CC versus an AoE, but slightly weaker CC overall. I think that's kind of what's going on here to make it like very compelling in that regard, but actually just a really nice buff overall. It's a great skill, really useful ability to have, and 60 seconds is a lot easier to use. You can use this multiple times in a fight, significantly easier to get through these Defiance bars, or of course, you know, anywhere where there's a Defiance bar. We've got some stuff for World versus World here, and there's a bit of a theme here. ArenaNet have taken a stance in this patch of trying to reduce down boon removal, right, in World versus World a little bit, to try and make the application of that not quite as extreme. And this is kind of a little bit of a part of that. Null Field, the range has gone down to 900, and Temporal Curtain, the range is down from 900 to 600. Obviously, both significant, right? Having a long range ability is, you know, it's obviously very strong, and now it's going to be slightly hard to actually connect your Null Field or your pull in World versus World. I don't think this makes the abilities bad by any stretch of the imagination. Temporal Curtain is, to be frank, one of the best abilities in the game. To be honest, it's absolutely crazy in basically every game where it does end up seeing play. Like, the utility of this kind of, like, you can pull your allies, or your enemies, rather, to, actually, you could pull your allies, that would be funny. Pull enemies to a ranged point is just an incredibly powerful piece of utility, one of the strongest skills in the game. So, I don't think this really actually damages Mesmer. It's just trying to make the ability a little bit more balanced. The rest of the changes here are... a lot of the other changes are focused on Virtuoso in PvP. Virtuoso in PvP is very obnoxious to play against, right? Like, in fact, Mesmer in general tends to lean into a pretty bunkery playstyle right now. Has a lot of blocking, a lot of distortion, a lot of damage reduction, a lot of Aegis, right? Which leads to it being very frustrating and very uninteractive to play against. So specifically looking at Chronomancer and Virtuoso here. Some just nerfs to the Chaos trait line, less damage reduction, less expertise and concentration in PvP. All that kind of good stuff there. Internal cooldown on Auspicious Anguish, all that kind of stuff. Less boons on Bountiful Disillusionment. And yeah, this is a good change. This build is super annoying, right? It's very, very frustrating to play against. It ain't that much fun. And we see the same thing over here in Virtuoso with some slightly more significant changes, by the way. So the big one here for PvP in particular is Blade Turn Requiem doesn't block anymore. That's actually a big deal in PvE as well, by the way, because this was a god-level defensive utility for Mesmer that meant that you could not only have your Distortion available on Virtuoso, but you also have a block on your Blade Turn Requiem, and now you don't have that anymore. Which is a very, very significant change. That's actually a really big nerf to Virtuoso. Virtuoso, not under threat, in my opinion, though, in PvE. It's still going to be fantastic. It has all the usual Mesmer stuff. And hey, you still have Distortion, which has been nerfed in PvE. But to be honest, you Mesmer mains got off lightly. Yeah, you did. They only nerfed it by 0.25 seconds per blade. So you still get 0.75 seconds of Distortion per blade in PvE. So it's still incredibly good. Certainly a slight nerf. I think they could have gone further. Right, they could have actually gone down to 0.5 and it still would have been actually very good in my opinion, or a very powerful piece of utility. But there you go, in that regard. A few other changes to Virtuoso Dagger as well, actually. Kind of aimed at making the abilities a bit more consistent. So Blade Call, you fire out the blades and they will kind of like home onto a target and like... Boom, like zone in on someone. An Unstable Blade Storm, the Dagger 3, is now a ground-targeted AoE that spins around, so it doesn't move anymore. The damage apparently is basically the same in PvE environments. The goal is to try and make it a bit more consistent, and potentially make it more of an option in, say, a World versus World environment, potentially. But I think it's a little bit tricky because Virtuoso... and, you know, like, Dagger is still very projectile-oriented, and that's quite difficult to make work. In that regard, in my opinion. But another change that happened over here to Escape Artist is actually pretty interesting. So Escape Artist, which is a trait that honestly did not really see a lot of play, now this says whenever you summon a Phantasm, you have Distortion on them. This is actually pretty cool, because the goal with this change, this was said on the stream, was to try to enable Phantasms to be able to function a little bit in World versus World. Because now you'll be able to they have distortion, so you might actually be able to land some of your phantasms, or they might be able to survive and actually cast their abilities to deliver value to your team. I think that's really good. You know, Mesmer, in general, has always... Mesmer's mechanic, like the phantasms and clones, they've always struggled to be effective in large-scale world versus world play because they simply die. Much like Ranger pets have this kind of similar issue, which is why I think ArenaNet is kind of looking at stuff like Soul Beast, looking at Untamed, looking at Druid, to make Ranger have some value. Without necessarily kind of relying on the class mechanic here. And we see the same thing here with Mesmer. So that's definitely a pretty fun one as well with Virtuoso. A few other things happen with Virtuoso, pretty much. The big one is essentially going to be Psychic Riposte. I'm not actually totally sure how I feel about this one. Basically now you always grant 1 blade and the unblockable effect while dodging, and you only get 2 blades when you evade or block. That's going down from 3 to 2. It's kind of an interesting meme here. So it kind of works out the same if you do actually get an evade. But it kind of makes it like slightly less interactive in a way, right? Because you're kind of guaranteed to get that unblockable when you dodge. It certainly does make it a lot more reliable, so you can reliably land your offensive attacks there and get through blocks. But I'm not sure how I feel about a trait being made less interactive, to be honest, overall. But yeah, I don't know. It's a change, okay? It is a change, my friends. That has happened there in that regard. And again, on the reduction of just invuln uptime on Virtuoso, Blade Renewal, the channel duration is now 2 seconds instead of 3, so you only get 2 seconds of extra distortion. You still got all of the blades, but just 2 seconds of distort. Yeah, good. No one likes it when Virtuoso goes invulnerable for 10 million years. Oh, yeah, except the people who play Virtuoso. You know, like, yeah, those guys probably like it, to be fair. But, you know, yeah. One thing that I think is notably maybe missing here is that one trait that's very, very powerful in Virtuoso right now is actually Blade Turn Refrain. This is the Aegis trait. That means whenever you use a Blade Song, you get an Aegis. Very powerful trait, actually, in PvP. I was kind of expecting that to maybe be taken a look at in some way if that was going to get changed or had an internal cooldown or just like a duration reduction or something like that, or just a flat nerf in some sense, a different boom potentially. But that does not appear to be the case this time around. But yeah, there you go for Virtuoso. So not too much for PvE, okay, a few little nerfs here and there, some significant changes in PvP, but this patch is big, guys. We're not done. We are not done. It's time. Chronomancer. How many times has this class been reworked? Seriously. Right? How many times do they rework Chrono? Someone should figure this out. What's the most reworked elite spec in the game? That's a good question. It might be Chronomancer, though. But here we go again. So, Alacrity and Quickness are now both reworked to function quite similarly, actually, on Chronomancer. So, Stretch Time and Seize the Moment. Flow of Time affects nearby allies. Grant Alacrity to nearby allies when you summon a Phantasm. And Seize the Moment. This trait no longer causes Tides of Time to grant Quickness, and instead grants Quickness to nearby allies when you summon a Phantasm. So, functionally speaking, these will now operate very, very similarly. You just need to use your class mechanic. You need to shatter, basically, and you need to summon Phantasms in order to generate both Quickness and Alacrity. So, both builds play out very, very similarly, which is a slightly strange, unprecedented amount of flexibility for a boon-applying class, actually. Now, you can give boons with any utility skills, basically, and also with any weapons you want, which is rather enticing, I think, for all of our Mesmer fans out there. This will really help you to kind of leverage your utility on Mesmer, right? Like, you can basically pick anything you want, anything you need. Of course, you do have some Phantasm utility skills that you can now use to give Quickness while also doing damage or performing other effects, but this is pretty interesting. I have got to bring up, though, I got to bring this up, guys, for our Mesmer fans. And this is something that we will get into later. And in fact, probably needs to be a separate discussion, I think. Some builds, including Chrono, still kind of require you to attack in order to generate these boons. Now, you can actually shatter, of course, just like baseline shatter to give a few of these boons now, which is definitely something, but I think you do have to be careful when some professions basically go, press button, give boon, Firebrand and Renegade, for example, whereas other ones have this slightly more convoluted and complicated setup to get there, which is pretty interesting. But I think there's a lot of potential here. Like, this really opens up Chronomancer, I think, to be a bit more flexible with your build choices, right? Like, that is pretty interesting. And we have a few changes to these wells as well. One of senility, cooldown reduction, and does just more damage in PvE. So, hell, you're kind of blasting this, and you still have that boon removal component too. So, definitely a big pumping ability. Bear in mind, it pulses multiple times, so you get that power coefficient multiple times. They've doubled it, and the cooldown's going down. Moving on to Mirage. It happened. It happened. It happened. Mirage dodge is back in PvP and World versus World. But they did give it the correct trade-off. You can no longer dodge while immobilized or under the effects of crowd control. Good. This actually allows Mirage to get back into the game in a way that's going to be hopefully enjoyable for Mirage players, but also not insanely oppressive. The ability to be able to dodge while CC'd is just not healthy, right? It is not healthy in any competitive mode under any circumstances. And to be frank, by the way, it's kind of busted in PvE as well. Like, this is a key rule break for a video game that you tank a CC, and, well, actually, it doesn't matter because I'm invuln anyway. This is a bit of a rule break, in my opinion, that just isn't really healthy for your game. So, I like the trade-off that they've done here. Well, it's not even, guys, it's not a trade-off. It's just the same as everyone else, right? You can't dodge while stunned or immobilized on any other class, okay? Like, that, it just makes sense, okay? That's the way it should be. And this will really help Mirage, obviously, in competitive modes, because having 2 dodges is a serious advantage. Having 1 dodge is a horrible downside to have on your elite specialization. So good news for all the Mirage players. And they kind of preemptively nerfed Mirage because they're really worried about it. They said this on the stream, that they'd rather kind of like buff it later than have it like just come into the game and destroy everything. So we have a few nerfs here across the board. I'm actually surprised. I'm really surprised to actually see PvE Alack Mirage take another hit, because now clone bleeding and torment duration goes from 8 to 4 seconds in all game modes. Torment duration on imaginary axes down to 2 seconds. Split surge might stacks on the greatsword. This is the greatsword one that gives you might the more targets you hit. Okay. That's going down because Power Mirage it could potentially be a threat here as well. Elusive Mind now says you gain you cleanse a Condi whenever you get Mirage Cloak instead of just while dodging. I kind of like that change. I think that makes it a bit more interactive with the Mirage Mirror mechanic, because a lot of your abilities might put down a mirror that you can now use to Condi cleanse. So this actually might end up helping a bit, but I do have to say they did reduce the number of Condis cleansed from 2 to 1 in PvP and World versus World. Again, just to make sure that it doesn't end up ruining the game. Now, I think this is worth noting here that... Bear in mind, guys, the confusion ticking damage is going to go up on this a lot, right? Because the scaling is better and the passive ticking is better. The active damage goes down, but halving the bleed and torment is like, oof. I mean, that is pretty intense. We'll have to see how Alack Mirage performs. That is quite an intense nerf, I have to say, in that regard. But we'll see how the confusion maybe kind of counteracts that. Maybe we'll see some tweaks or further adjustments to these numbers. Specifically for PvE. Because, again, their main concern here is not having it just utterly destroy PvP. Because, look, I don't know if any of you remember the absolute fever dream hellscape that was Mirage in PvP at its true might, its true dominance. It was so oppressive that it could be unkillable, essentially, uncatchable, and also permanently lock you down and obliterate you in seconds. It was one of the most broken builds in the history of PvP. It was absolutely insane, and I don't think CMC wants that coming back anytime soon, okay? But yeah. I am surprised that they nerfed it in PvE as well, though, especially considering the previous nerfs to Alack Mirage in PvE. We'll see if that actually makes it into the game. Because, again, they did actually specifically call out that, you know, not everything's going to make it. Some things will get changed. Some things will be adjusted there as well. Wow. Incredible stuff. That's Mesmer. But listen up, gamers. We're just warming up. Let's talk about... Oh, no. Necromancer. Necros. Oh, no. Oh, no. I honestly never thought I'd see the day. I did not see this coming. Well, actually, I kind of did, but I almost wasn't expecting this. Necros. You know you had it all. Scourge mains. You guys had it all. You did. Heal Scourge, strongest build in the game. You do have to adjust your comp a bit. You've got to use the brain, right? You've got to maybe put in a bit of effort, but Heal Scourge, by far, the strongest build in the game. DPS Scourge. Not the highest damage, but one of the most reliable, hard carry DPS specs in the entire game. But you had to ask for it, didn't it? You had to ask. You had to ask for Alacrity on Scourge. And guess what? You got it. But I'm not sure if you want it. So, let's see what happens. Well of Blood grants regen, and that will, of course, apply to the Ritual of Life as well. But this is the trade-off, right? The Alacrity is going to come at a cost, and ArenaNet correctly identified this. If they hadn't nerfed Heal Scourge when introducing Alacrity, it would have made Heal Scourge the most broken build, insanely oppressive build in PvE. So, Ritual of Life, 2% res pulse. That is like a 70% nerf to the res speed. And Transfusion, 1% res per pulse now. Only when you have Scourge equipped. And, scroll down here as well, barrier scaling has also gone down significantly. I think that's actually not in the notes, but yeah, the barrier scaling on the F3 also went down very significantly too. Like, I think they nearly halved the scaling, and I think the base value also went down a little bit, if I recall correctly, on that Sand Cascade. So, significantly less barrier. Oh yeah. And, actually, we're better talk. Let's get this out of the way. Let's get out of the way before we get in there. Manifest Sandshade. It's not in the notes. It was on the stream, and it was one of those slightly later changes. Oh, boy. Shades in Guild Wars 2. Shades in PvE now last 8 seconds. Down from 20. A hammer blow to all PvE Scourge builds. An absolute hammer blow to all of this. Because now it's significantly harder for the DPS builds, or potentially some of the hybrid builds, to maintain their shades. So you have less targets. You can't hit as many targets. And you also you don't have as much expertise and concentration. You're not going to have as much damage reduction as well from Blood as Sand. And you just can't cover as much ground. You can't have, like, all the, you can't be cleaving everything at the same time. You have to dedicate more shade resources to either doing damage or either supporting your team. This is an apocalypse nerf to Scourge, in my opinion. And I definitely expect some tuning here. Either with some tweaks before launch or in future updates. Because I will be honest here. I actually think Heal Scourge, and we'll get into Heal Scourge in just a moment, Heal Scourge survives. It will be a lot harder to play, though. Much more skill demanding to actually get value out of. But it can exist. I think it can actually kind of exist. Right? It can exist. But DPS Scourge, that is where we're in trouble. Like, DPS Scourge, it really relied on having that utility, right? Having barrier coverage, great AoE cleave, being able to be focused on multiple locations at the same time, the Condi cleanse, the barrier, right? The damage reduction, right? Like that. And of course, now we're losing damage too. We have less expertise on the build. And that is getting dumpstered, to be honest. I think that, weirdly enough, I rate, as of this patch, the current patch, I rate DPS Scourge as an S-tier god-level build. I actually think this genuinely nukes Scourge to extremely mediocre. In fact, I would say it will become underpowered from the damage build. Certainly. Like, this is a huge, colossal nerf to basically everything that Scourge can do. And that may need some compensation, either with some more damage or potentially looking at that shade placement, you know, maybe trying to make the alacrity work a little bit differently. Because, again, why have they done this? They have done this change because Scourge can hit 10 targets, and they don't want Scourge to be able to give alacrity to 10 targets. That's the problem here. So they had to make it so you can't have all your shades up the entire time because of the alacrity. Otherwise, it would just completely dominate by giving boons to everyone. It'd be able to give might to everyone, it'd be able to give alacrity to everyone, which is definitely a concern that ArenaNet have here. I'll have to think about this. I'll think about this. But this kind of puts Scourge into the rework tier, I think. They might have to look at it mechanically or make it apply alacrity in a different way and just like hard limit it to 5 targets in some way. It might be a bit gimmicky to do that, but they might have to. Because to be frank, Scourge is just going to be in this weird design trap that it's in right now because of that 10 target capacity that it has that's baked into the kit. They might have to find some way to process this, because otherwise it's just... It's going to be tough, right? It's going to be tough. On the Heal Scourge thing, though, Heal Scourge is getting nerfed a lot. Your res speed is significantly slow, but bear in mind, double Well of Blood and Transfusion, combined with all of your healing modifiers, right? From your Mercy Runes, from your healing food, right? Like Transference Sigil, all that kind of good stuff. You are still actually going to revive very, very quickly in AoE with this build on short cooldowns. And I really want to point this out, by the way. The best part about Heal Scourge was not necessarily the revive speed. The revive speed was really good, but what was really good about it was the ability to rescue people, was the ability to group up down states so they can be chain revived very, very quickly. That was why Transfusion was good. And that is still intact, but even that has actually been touched. Check this out. You only get a teleport on the first pulse now, as opposed to kind of having a second pulse that happens on a 5 seconds later, basically. It's kind of like, it's weird. There's kind of like an internal cooldown on getting pulled by Transfusion, and it pulls the entire time. So if someone goes down, they'll immediately get sucked. This is kind of a big nerf, I'm not gonna lie, to Heal Scourge too, significantly reducing that kind of rescue potential to only activate once. So basically, if you're channeling Transfusion now, if someone downs it, they'll immediately get pulled to you. Right, even if you've pressed the button a couple of seconds ago. Now, that won't happen anymore. Like, you'll have to actually press it again, hopefully, to be able to actually rescue that player. This is a big, 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 big nerf to Heal Scourge overall. And does it make it bad? No. But what it does, it really skill checks you. If you don't play Heal Scourge well, next patch, it is beyond worthless. It was kind of already the case now. Heal Scourge kind of had this... You needed to have a little bit of game sense about it, a little bit of game sense to get some good use out of Heal Scourge. But now, it is just bad, right? No, you will not get... You'll do nothing, basically. Especially seeing as, guys, here's the other news. Yeah, the trait has been moved to the Grandmaster, replacing Feed from Corruption. Oh no. You can't have Big Shade if you want to give Alacrity on Heal Scourge. Oh! Ouch. So now if you're playing, say, a Heal Alacrity Scourge, your barrier is far worse because the scaling's down and you don't hit everyone. And your transfusion's worse and your res speed is also worse as well. Excuse me. Is worse as well. So that is a bit of a smackdown there, my friends. Oof. Goodness me. Yeah. Breaking news. Feed from Corruption being swapped with Desert Empowerment. Nuked from orbit. It no longer steals boons when you remove or corrupt. Instead, I'm afraid, the suffering of Scourge is not over. It will give you barrier with a small ICD. Well, how about that, gamers? How about that? I do actually think this is a very significant nerf to Scourge overall. And again, we're kind of talking about this a little bit earlier with Scourge, but I think that this has a potential to really shift the meta away from Scourge and even away from kind of ranged boon removal and shift the world versus world meta much more melee-oriented, bringing in Reapers for your Necromancer position, like utilizing, of course, your Corruption Well, Nothing Can Save You, Great Sword, all that kind of stuff. To remove boons and also still corrupts them there as well. So that's actually a very significant change, in my opinion, overall to Scourge. I think, you know, it was... Scourge took a beating this patch in World versus World, for sure. But now with that as well, oof. Definitely a tricky trade to balance, so I understand why they changed this, because it's one of those things that the effect is just so strong. You're either going to make it like complete trash or you have to rework it to balance it. And yeah, the rework direction is where we're going. So, of course, you can still sustain yourself there, I guess, by corrupting and removing boons. But the real strength of Scourge was this ability that it had to consistently absorb boons, like self-boon itself, give itself stability, give itself resistance, right? Give itself protection, even steal some might, all that kind of stuff. It got massively nerfed, of course, in the previous patch. A lot of durations going down, a lot of stack counts going down with all of these boons. But ArenaNet have decreed it not enough. And that could be exciting, right? I think we have been in it. Well, look, we've been in a Scourge meta in World versus World for a very, very long time. So if this is what it takes to dislodge it, then maybe that is a good thing. But yeah, Scourge is going to maybe have to find a new home in World versus World in that next patch because, wow, ouch. Another crushing blow to the Necromancers. You know, honestly, it's been a long time coming, guys. Scourge has been one of the best specs in the game for a very long time. So you know what? It's our rotation to be in the gutter, guys. You know, it's time. It's time for us to be thrown in the trash. Now, can this still end up being good? I actually think a build that might have some promise is kind of the hybrid build. So a build that is focused on applying might, alacrity, and maybe even fury with Desiccate, which is now going to give fury and significantly more might after the patch, alongside some pulsing barrier with Sandstorm Shroud, because this now pulses barrier. This actually makes this ability a lot better, by the way. This is a really strong trait now. Pretty good, I guess. Abrasive Grit, you're going to take that to, you know, you're going to give might, right, whenever you pulse barrier. Bear in mind, you pulse barrier, right? So that's actually going to be a lot of might from Sandstorm Shroud combined with Abrasive Grit. So basically, it's going to be, you're going to play Abrasive Grit, Sandstorm Shroud, and then you're also going to play Desert Empowerment. That's a thing is, you're going to be a bit of a noodle, because you actually sack a lot of, you sack a lot of damage in order to pick that up, and you're probably going to want to have some boon duration, maybe some ritualist gear on there as well. Oh man, we have to see the numbers here, but it's a bit shaky, guys. It's a little bit of a shaky idea to see how this one's going to go. Yeah, maybe Plague Doctor or something with Blood Magic can kind of be this kind of crazy hybrid build, right, that does all of these things at the same time. There's some potential. There's definitely some potential. Yeah, and that's probably the more promising build for Scourge, I think. So kind of the Alack DPS role. Like, it's going to be a weird one. It's going to be Alack DPS heal role. But also not really, because it doesn't really have the full boon access yet. It doesn't really have a protection uptime, to be honest, right? Its healing isn't going to be that great on Plague Doctor. It's kind of in a bit of a weird spot, to be honest here, in this regard. A bit of a weird one here for Scourge. One thing that is really fun, check this out. They finally made one of the worst skills in the entire game significantly better. Serpent Siphon. You just have like a standard AoE now that you just like splat on people, and it gives barrier, regen, and Aegis as well, and that's a 20-second cooldown, so that is very nice, actually, for all of our support Scourge fans. Anything that has that kind of reactive Aegis is very, very powerful, and regen access for the healing build, also pretty good too. The thing is, Necro utility skills are pretty competitive. I don't really see Desiccate being high value, to be perfectly honest, because Necro skills are so good. You really want Sign of Undeath. You really want Spectral Grasp, right? You really want, you know, Trail of Anguish is also a really good skill for the stability and so on that you can give. It's very hard to fit all of these things in at the same time to kind of have that well-rounded build. And I don't quite think that Scourge is going to be there. It doesn't really have the full repertoire of boons needed to be like a standard healer, but now it also doesn't have its gimmick has been significantly nerfed as well. Oh boy, we're going to need probably, we're probably going to need a little bit of iteration on this one, guys, I think. We're going wild, we're going crazy, we're going big, but yeah, not quite there, I think. I think we're not quite there. Quickening Thirst rate. You gain life force when you strike an enemy with a dagger skill. This is actually pretty interesting. So they're trying to make dagger into this big kind of brawling weapon. So you generate a lot of life force, a lot of self-healing, all this kind of good stuff is what their goal is in this regard, which is interesting. Like, this ability is kind of like, you don't have to channel it anymore, you just kind of like latch it onto people and then boom, it just like heals you over time, which is actually pretty cool RP if you ask me. Then we have a few more changes to Blood. Banshee as well, you don't get the extra healing. Life from Death is now going to be that kind of heal Scourge trait as well. You know, I'm not even sure if this one, I mean, maybe this is good, because you just want as much outgoing healing for your reviving speed, your regeneration, and so on. Maybe this is where we want to go. I think I'd like to see maybe more regeneration access and maybe improved regeneration, like 20% better regen from some of these traits in Blood Magic to really kind of try and push this sustained healer with the barrier and regeneration and transfusion healing there, which is going to be where it needs to go, I guess, at this stage, but yeah, bit of a weird one here as well. They wanted to keep the Banshee as well, one more of a Warhorn thing, and then Life from Death being that kind of, that Blood Magic healer style build. But don't worry, Heal Scourge mains, do not despair. I don't think the build is actually bad, it's just a lot harder to play, and yeah, DPS Scourge mains, unlucky, guys, okay? You know, we had a good run, you know? Like, it dominated the game for multiple years. Feels good. In other news, with Necro, this is kind of like some general Necro changes, I guess, but I think I'm going to talk about it in the World versus World context, because that's kind of what they're aimed at. Again, in line with this targeting of like the big boon corruption spam, a lot of the Necro abilities and traits now remove boons. So Axe, Unholy Feast, and Spiteful Spirit, they remove boons instead. Enfeebling Blood, the dagger offhand, now also removes instead of converting. Again, very World versus World focused changes here to kind of avoid this random Condi spam and corruption spam. Boon corruption can be very brutal to play against and kind of unfun, so it does make sense there. I think they want corruption to be a bit more special, right? So it's something that you might use in a quite telegraphed way that will be relatively avoidable for a player there, rather than something that just kind of like happens and gets spammed out, especially on these passive traits. Like Spiteful Spirit and Lesser Enfeeble that triggers when you enter Shroud. This made Condi, This made Condi removal absolutely brutal, right? It made Condi Reaper, like, absolutely insane in PvP to play against, because it goes in Shroud, it insta-corrupts you. Blech. Oh, man. It hurts. It ain't that much fun, okay? It is big pain. And you know, oh yeah, these two, I actually misread this. These two don't even remove boons, by the looks of it. These have just been, like, completely, like, hard Omega nuked. Right, this is just like, it just does the bleeding and the weakness now. You don't have that corruption effect or remove, like, whatsoever. Wow. Ooh, big hits for Condi Reaper in PvP. Ooh, that really hurts, actually. That was a build that had just come, just like started to become really strong, in my opinion. Really fun to play in ranked. I've been dominating in PvP with Condi Reaper, guys. I admit it. And, oof, oh, man. I actually think that's very significant. That's really significant for Condi Reaper in PvP. I don't think it will be bad, but I think this actually is a very big shove. I think this does actually... I'm not if it will still be good, but I think it definitely significantly shoves it away from seeing like a lot of top tier play, in my opinion, because this kind of Spiteful Spirit Enfeeble combo, like that corruption, you know, that conversion being attached to the Shroud mechanic and having that instant ability just like boom corrupt everything, was a really big part of the toolkit, and this is a very significant nerf. Like, that is poof, ouch, in high level, for sure. Oof. Okay, now we also have a few other things going on here. Sickness of Suffering. Dude, we're going back in time, guys. It's kind of like the old version of this trait, almost. This trait has been reworked and causes Signet skills to remove boons from affected foes. And also the cooldowns are going down because the cooldown is gone, right? It's like baseline. You know, I guess this is a now potential thing that you can use in World versus World, right? With Signet of the Locust, right? So you can do Signet of the Locust for like a big AoE boon removal, right? In this case, like comboing these two things together. And that might be kind of like a thing that you might end up doing in this situation rather than corrupting stuff. I thought this was kind of a fun gimmick, like recharging the signets while you're in Shroud. I actually think that was quite fun. To have that kind of slightly strange interaction, keeping the passives there as well, but it's now been fully reworked. So, well, I mean, it's certainly different in this regard. A lot of the signets also got their cooldowns reduced baseline. This is a bit of a theme that you're going to see. Signet of Spite, very notably significant cooldown reduction in PvE, which is super nice for a lot of DPS necro builds, particularly Con the Harbinger is going to be pretty happy about that, as that's an important skill to have there. But yeah... that's kind of that for Necromancer, I guess. You know, that is a thing. It is content, guys, okay? It is big content. Not sure if these signets are going to see that much play in compared, to be honest. Like, Signet of Spite sees a bit of niche play, I think. And Signet of the Locust might do pretty okay in World versus World now, depending on, like, how this actually operates, right? Like, if you're going to get, like, mega boon removal there, like a really big pulse of boon removal with these two things kind of comboed together. Definitely a possibility there. Signet of Vampirism, kind of a nice in PvE, right? This skill's quite good in PvE for some kind of any kind of DPS necro build. So core action's always nice, right? It's always nice. We love it. And also Devouring Darkness, that's Scepter 3, when you have the Lingering Curse. Look at that mouth, it's horrifying. The cooldown's going up in World versus World to 18 seconds. So you're not going to be able to kind of like... You're going to get a lot less casts of this, because the way that Scourge plays out in World versus World is that you kind of... well, you don't exactly weapon swap on CD, but what you'll do is you'll go Devouring Darkness, boom, 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 use some skills, then use it again, weapon swap. Use all your axe skills, weapon swap, go back, and you kind of rotate around like that. So this essentially gives you significantly less casts because it doesn't quite fit into your kind of weapon rotation quite as efficiently anymore because, you know, it's not 10 seconds. Skills that kind of line up with that 10-second cooldown, same as weapon swap, have this kind of rotational element to them that allows you to kind of optimize how many casts you get on these weapons. So that's precisely being reduced down a little bit. Again, trying to target boon removal, specifically corruption in World versus World. I do think ArenaNet need to be a little bit careful, and let me say why. A lot of boon removal has been kind of stripped down a little bit. We'll see some changes to Warrior later on as well. ArenaNet need to watch out here. You don't want to over-nerf boon removal. If you do, then you kind of have these unstoppable blobs, right, that just kind of roll over you with every boon in the game permanently. Like, you don't really want this kind of, like, bunkery uber boon meta. I'm not sure if that's going to happen with this stuff, because there's still a lot of damage in World versus World, and coordinated spikes are definitely going to blast you really hard, so bear that in mind. But I think it is something to kind of keep an eye on and see how some of this stuff actually shakes out when it makes it into the game. Okay. And now... it is also time... oh, yeah, they did the same thing with Path of Corruption. Now, and there are a few kind of strange changes here. You'll see a few of these. They're like, you know what? We give up, guys. Okay? You know, we can't be bothered to balance it. If you take this trait while you're a Scourge, Nefarious Favor cooldown goes up by 50%. Boom. And there are a few of these changes that are honestly really funny. We'll see a few of these later. But these are pretty epic. 50% cooldown up, so even less corruption on your Scourge. You know, I'm actually curious about this. If this does cause a bit of a shift in playing Scourge whatsoever in World versus World, there are lots of other good boon removal options that do exist that aren't necessarily Scourge. You could be going for Reapers, for example, a more melee-oriented playstyle potentially with utilizing the Reaper removal and stuff like that, as opposed to going with Scourge, because, like, man, like, this is gonna be big. I mean, yeah, you're obviously still gonna take it on Scourge because, you know, it's just like you just corrupt a boon whenever you use your F2, but still, you know, we'll have to see if we do go a slightly different direction using different professions to remove boons, or if you still kind of see some Scourges moving in there, because I think a lot of these changes, like, really add up. Like, they're significant. Like, don't get me wrong, you still have the classic ranged boon removal that Scourge has. You have Necromancer Wells, you have Ghastly Breach, which is another, like, godlike skill for World vs. World, and Trail of Anguish and so on. But man, this stuff definitely adds up quite significantly, like, especially given the strength of corruption effects versus mere removal effects. With Harbinger, honestly, not too much. Don't worry, you guys are safe. So the damage of Harbinger got nerfed a little bit. It's not here in the notes, but basically the trait for, was it Septic Corruption, you get less damage output per stack of Blight from 0.5% per stack down to 0.25% per stack. However, I do think that Harbinger damage will remain pretty solid overall, so I don't think that's actually the end of the world for all of you Harbinger fans. And then Elixir cooldowns, all going down in PvP and World versus World, not in PvE. I believe that's actually because they're already reduced, basically, in PvE, or already pretty low in PvE. So there you go. Like, here are some Elixirs. You can use them. They're already actually pretty good. Now they're actually slightly better in some of these other game modes. Vials, yeah, you don't get the cooldown reduction now. Now you just get vulnerability. Honestly, this trait is kind of trash, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't think it's really exciting anymore. Like, no CDR, you get the Vuln, but I don't know, it is what it is. It is what it is. Like, I think there's some more work on some of these cooldown traits that probably need to be tuned up a little bit or reworked a little bit more significantly. But that is kind of how we're feeling about that. But yeah, that is the deal for Necro. Reaper escaped, guys. Harbinger kind of escaped, but Scourge, man, almost the first, this is the first time, I think, where, this is the first time since the release of Scourge where I'm really looking at it in PvE and thinking, ooh, that might not actually be that good. Yeah. But hey, we've got Reaper and Harbinger, so we're good, right? Like, yeah, whoa, yeah, we got Reaper and Harb, guys. Let's go. Yes, let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Yeah. All right. So, I think we're done with Necromancer. You know what? Let's do Ellie, okay? You know, like, speaking of nerfs, let's talk about... Oh my god. Oh, dear. Oh, no. Oh. Ellie mains. No. I'm sorry, guys. Honestly, if you're not main, you just turn it off. Turn it off now, guys. Don't read it. Oh, wait. I'm joking. We've actually got buffs here. Hooray! Okay, so... Let's get into it. Catalyst quickness isn't provided by utility skills, but we felt like it could still benefit from a usability improvement. We've updated Spectacular Sphere to grant quickness from any Jade Sphere instead of only the Air Sphere, which should give Catalyst players a bit more flexibility with their skill rotations. We've also made some improvements to Tempest damage builds with an update to Tempestuous Aria, as well as some general improvements for Offhand Dagger and for the Weaver in PvP. So first up, CMC and ArenaNet, they love Dagger Offhand, and they really want you to use Dagger Offhand on Catalyst in PvP, basically. Fire Grab, more usable, 90 degree cone instead of 60, so a lot easier to land that skill. Frost Aura cooldown goes down, which is a very powerful, bear in mind, this actually can be used to heal and provide like a defensive, you know, to chill enemies, right, and also... to reduce damage. Cleansing Wave, really powerful heal actually on that 5th skill on Dagger in Water. Cooldown reduction again. Updraft, bigger radius so you can land your knockback a little bit easier. And Churning Earth, fully reworked, guys. Finally, they you know, you actually don't have to like sit there and do nothing. You kind of leap forwards now and basically smash people with this big explosion. In this case, obviously the power level is going to go down a little bit because you don't have that channel, right? So, but it's now way more usable. It's a smaller radius, less damage, less condies, but way more usability. You know, I know this is going to sound like a meme, and maybe some Ellie mains can correct me if I'm wrong, but I still kind of struggle to see it over Focus. Focus is just... so good. Obsidian Flesh, Magnetic Surge, Comet, Gale, Swirling Winds, right? Having a Fire Aura kind of baked in as well. Like, it's such a good toolkit, right? It is such a good toolkit, to be honest. So I don't think we're getting there. To be honest, simply because of how powerful that defensive utility that you know, that Focus brings to the table. It is so powerful for these Catalyst builds in PvP, right? Like Fresh Air Catalyst still going strong, still kind of dominating, still going big, but super good toolkit there. And even though Dagger, I'm looking at these skills and I go, whoa, these skills are pretty good, right? These are good, but I'm just not sure if they're I'm just not sure if they're good enough compared to Focus, to be honest. Even though these abilities look really cool and fun to use. Moving on to the signets, we got some fun stuff here. Written in Stone. No longer you don't get the recharge anymore, but now you get an aura to the Elementalist after using a signet skill. How cool is that? And that's based on the signet. So fire signet will be fire aura, earth aura, magnetic, etc. Like signet of air, lightning aura, water aura, frost aura. Water signet, frost aura. I presume signet of restoration might be light aura as well, I think, because Rune of Radiance gives you light aura when you heal. I think that would maybe make the most sense on Signet of Restoration to have a light aura, potentially. Oh, they said frost aura. Okay, never mind. Okay, no, I must have missed that. So frost aura there. So that's actually pretty nifty. So you have a lot of frost aura access there in that case on Signet of Restoration. I guess that also makes sense. Healing is very watery. It's very frosty, but there you go. Enjoy. This is there's some very interesting potential here as well. Like having a shocking aura whenever you stun break, well, is pretty nifty there as well. And also, these Signet cooldown reduction traits, not only are they just quite nice, there's a bit more usability on these, but also, this is kind of leaning towards a Condy-Alak build, I think, in PvE. Right, and we'll see a little bit more on that later, actually. But Signet of Fire and Signet of Earth, already really good for Condy-Alak Tempest, these type of builds here too. And also, Signet of Earth now significantly better, actually. 15-second cooldown in PvE, and the passive is presumably going to be 10% damage reduction, right? Strike damage reduction specifically, instead of 180 toughness. This is nice. Think about Tempest now, guys. So, let's imagine we're playing a Tempest build with Signet of Earth. We have 40% damage reduction from protection, 10% from our Signet, and then a further 10% in Earth, and then another 10... Oh, I think it's 7% in Earth, right? And then I think 10% is conditional, depending on if you're in melee range or if you're close enough to the target. So you're kind of a beast, right, in PvE. You know, like the whole, oh, Ellie, I'm in downstate thing. Honestly, it will be impressive if you manage to go downstate, if you're playing this kind of Earth, Fire, Tempest build as a DPS. Kind of promising, actually. Like, kind of promising here, for sure, I think, going in this direction. And... Oh, I don't know if they said this. Someone can tell me. In fact, some of the devs are here. Do you still maintain the passive on Written in Stone? Like, that's the question here. They probably said this on stream, to be fair, but I actually do not remember. I thought that would actually be crazy, right? If you had both of those bonuses at the same time, that would be very exciting, if that's the case. But yeah, a lot of Frost Aura access. So you can detonate that Frost Aura for healing. You can potentially share that Frost Aura as well if you somehow make some kind of unholy concoction with water and, you know, the earth, the Written in Stone there as well. Of course, that's going to compete with, if you're doing that in a competitive mode, for example, that's going to compete with Stoneheart, which is definitely a little bit tricky. But still, keep that as well. Oh yeah, that is very nifty then. Yeah, honestly, I have to say, I'll actually scroll down, let's cut to the chase here. Now, Tempestuous Aria, you don't get weakness, but you get more damage when you apply an aura to an ally. This, combined with these previous changes to these signets, right, and Written in Stone as well, this is pretty exciting, I think, for DPS, Condi Tempest, or, of course, actually, I would say the... Alacrity Condi Tempest, because you're going to get, if this is like 10% more damage or something like that, that's significant, right? Like an extra 10% modifier, that's going to be pretty juicy. And this build has actually been kind of on the peripheral for a while now. Like Condy-Alak Tempest, it's kind of existed. Its gearing choices are weird. You do have like some like Celestial and Grieving gear mix in there, but look, we don't talk about that, right? It's a bit weird to gear it up, but it's been kind of hovering around there a little bit. It's been like wibbly wobbly all over the place. I think this change might actually nudge it in that direction where it can actually really shine. If this is like 10% damage, 15% damage, that build's going to pump. Even the full DPS build, by the way. I believe the full DPS Tempest build, seriously, this is not a joke, does about, I think it's over 30k, like 35k DPS on full DPS Tempest right now. Think about it. If this is kind of like an extra 10, 15%, okay, we're in business at that point. Like, you're kind of getting there. And bear in mind, Tempest does have access to solid utility. You have Eye of the Storm for super stability. You have Aegis and protection. Good boon access on your on Aftershock as well, right? Like rebound, wash the pain away. You can, you have different attunements, right? So if you're using a staff, which actually I believe you play on the Condi DPS build, I think. You can go ahead and, like, heal people. On Warhorn, you can heal people still. You have Water Overload. You extend boons with Sand Squall on, say, like a Dagger Warhorn or Scepter Warhorn build. On, say, the Conditioned DPS Alack build that also gives Might and Protection. All right, can share Fury. It's kind of attractive, right? Like, it actually is a pretty attractive. Well, it's 10% for both strike and coin damage, which, by the way, guys, it being both is relevant here. Why? Because Tempest is actually quite hybrid. It's quite hybrid. There's actually a lot of power damage and a lot of Condi damage on the DPS Alacrity build. It's a Condi DPS Alacrity build, but it's quite hybrid. That is actually relevant. So this is quite nice. I'm very interested to see how this build will actually end up performing. You do trade it off for not having really high stability uptime on your overloads, which definitely is a trade-off, but to be fair, that is kind of the point of having 3 traits, right? Like, you pick between them, depending on what kind of build you're looking to make. So that does make a little bit of sense. Pretty big. Pretty damn big. I'm very excited to see that build actually pan out and see how that's going to work. Let's see, what else happened? They just reduced the cooldown on arcane skills. They did that. Inscription gives resistance with every glyph alongside the other boon. Do I see this actually being played? The thing is, I feel like if we're taking air, a lot of the time we're playing like Fresh Air Weaver with this build, I think. And you kind of really want, like, the big damage, right? Like, you get the Omega damage. You might not necessarily care about the Fury from in air as much because you have Arcane Prowess now, which is pretty cool. This allows you to now gain Fury. Going back old school, guys. You gain Fury whenever you kind of like attunement swap now instead of the Might, how it used to be back in the day, guys. We're going back old school these days. But I think there is definitely some potential, for sure, right? With this, I'm not sure if I see this particular trade being. I think it's like supposed to be like an interesting option that maybe you'll experiment with. Maybe I'm totally wrong, but currently on the Ele builds that exist now, not sure if I totally see it. But you should never underestimate resistance. Resistance is very, very good. It's a very powerful effect to actually have access to overall. And then a few changes to Weaver. Weaver is actually kind of one of those builds that has kind of fallen off in PvP a lot. Although, weirdly enough, Weaver, I feel like, just got replaced by Catalyst, to be honest. Very significantly, with like the new like Catalyst builds that have come out, whereas Weaver doesn't really exist. And also, I think it's also worth noting that Weaver, I think the build that I think is kind of the more established build is the Duelist build, kind of like the Sword Weaver build that does a lot of 1v1ing. Right now, 1v1ers are not super in the meta. There's like a lot of roaming kind of bruiser style classes that exist. You don't have quite as much of a duelist role in PvP currently. Everything is a little bit more mobile, and you kind of have things that can kind of 1v1, right? Like not necessarily dedicated 1v1ers a lot of the time. And this is kind of the issue with Weaver more than anything else. Like, if you have a metagame shift that shifts more back towards duelists, I think Weaver will kind of, like, naturally pop out of the woodwork in these types of situations. Gale Strike, giving the extra float duration here is pretty tasty, actually. That really helps you kind of line up some of these big combos, like more CC, especially on Weaver. Weaver really loves, like, getting a CC on you and then, bam, slamming a big pulsing field immediately afterwards, or hitting a big combo on you with a CC chain. So that can really be a big combo enabler for Weaver. I think, and a few kind of like bug fixes and usability improvements here to some of the combo skills and just the Cauterizing Strike double fire skill there as well. Twist of Fate, yeah, this skill honestly got memed so hard, didn't it? Like, the cooldown on it went up so much, but they're like, you know what, let's not do that. Let's give it one charge and take it down to 30 seconds. This is kind of like what they did with Shake It Off, right? Shake It Off, enjoy, is now... it's basically the same as that. Overall, this probably ends up making it, I would say, a fair bit better. Like, having your stun break on a 75-second cooldown is pretty pain. There's definitely some loss there with the ammo. You can't, like, double use it real quick. But having to basically wait 75 seconds for a stun break, yeah, no, right? Like, that's not really going to cut it in PvP, to be honest. Especially seeing, think about that. It takes 150 seconds to get both of your charges back in PvP. Like, that's quite a long time, right? That's a very long time in that regard. But there you go. So some nice over there for Weave, but I don't really see anything happening right now until we see a little bit of a meta shift in PvP. And finally, the Catalyst stuff. These are actually pretty positive, I think. You now gain quickness on any sphere with Spectacular Sphere. In addition to the boons, the quickness has gone down from 5 to 2 seconds. So basically, you've still got quickness, but now it's not only on air sphere, which I think massively improves the playability of this build. It means that if someone misses your sphere, they don't just get 0 quickness. That's really nice, right? It means that if you kind of, you can't make it to air in time for whatever reason, you kind of adapted your rotation, you can still apply your key boon alongside all of your other spheres as you rotate through them, doing your damage. So I think this is a very, very welcome change, actually. A very welcome change to Catalyst. Certainly towards that kind of heal Catalyst build and also the quickness Catalyst build. I think this actually helps out heal Catalyst a fair bit because it means you're not quite as forced to, like, consistently rotate into this attunement to kind of get some value out of that as well. There is one thing, okay? There is one thing that we've got to talk about here, guys, okay? It is that Catalyst is still a little bit weird with its energy generation, and you do need to kind of be attacking stuff and have energy in order to apply those boons, which again is a slight limitation of the build, which can make it a little bit awkward to play. But I definitely think this is a pretty big step in the right direction, actually, with improving this build. Definitely a build that I feel like I've been waiting since EOD launch to see this build become exciting. And you know what? Okay, we've taken the first step on that road. Very cool stuff for our Elementalist mates. Look, you guys dodged the nerfs. How does it feel? Does it feel good? Hooray, we did it. We dodged the nerfs, guys. Elementalist mains. Very good. You twist-of-fated. You twist-of-fated away. And then Necro leapt in front of you. You know, like Necro took one for the team for once, yeah? That is actually pretty funny. Right? I like that. I like the idea of Necromancer just throwing itself in front of Elementalist, shielding Elementalist. A few things that are notably absent here actually is Tempest Alacrity application. And some of the boon radii, for example, Fire Overload radius, very, very small. Earth Overload radius in PvE, very, very small. That does kind of, it is still a bit awkward. The Alacrity application is still a little bit awkward, I think. So, Heal Tempest in particular cares about this. I guess DPS Alac Tempest a little bit, but specifically Heal Tempest. You do not want to have a rotation as a healer. You don't want to have this, like, oh, I must fire over, then I must do an earth over and rotate back and forth. You want to be reactive, okay? You want to be reactive. Okay? And the fact that Heal Tempest still can't do this does put it at a slight disadvantage, in my opinion, compared to some of its more contemporary builds that exist there. The Alacrity uptime might have to be looked at a little bit here, or like how the Alacrity actually works in the future to help make it a little bit more reactive and a little bit less locked into this kind of rotational playstyle. Especially seeing as you have to channel and basically camp on the group while you're applying that boon. We'll see how it turns out, but I definitely think that that's something that's going to be kind of like hovering there and lurking around, right? Waiting for stuff to kind of pop up in that regard. But that's basically it for Elementalist. In fact, that's it for our first 3 professions that we've got through there. Elementalist, Mesmer, and Necromancer. Very exciting stuff. Goodness me. I'm very interested to see what all of you lot think about this. That is for sure. Oh, yeah. Big balance stuff. And we're only just getting warmed up, by the way. We are now going to move on to the next 3.